So today's lecture is going to be on Ruby on Rails. So what is Ruby on Rails? So yesterday I conducted an informal survey of the staff, and I asked them, what is Ruby on Rails? And the most popular answer I got was magic. So this was obviously not very helpful. I don't think I've gotten a more unhelpful response in a while. So what actually is magic? Well, in the case of Ruby on Rails, magic makes things easy. Ruby on Rails is very magical because it tries to help people who are new to web programming as much as possible. So you can just type like one line, and then half of your app will be automatically generated for you because Ruby tries to help you. Unfortunately, magic is also the downside of Ruby on Rails. It's magical, but it might be a bit too magical. So you might be like, well, give me a post, and then Ruby will give you everything that you ever needed to do with posts, and you don't actually need all of that. So the downside of Rails is that it's a bit too magical. So to show you guys just how magical Rails is, we're going to go through a demo. So we're going to make the same app that we made yesterday in Node. So basically, it's going to be an application that lets you add pictures to your website, and it will also let you capture them. So we're going to make, we sent out an email yesterday about installing Rails. If you have that, if you've installed Rails and everything works, feel free to follow along. But if not, I'm going to do a code walkthrough, so don't worry about it. So first, we're going to make a new Rails app, and we'll just call it Pix because it's dealing with Pix. Oh, can you guys see this in the back? Good? Can you guys see this? Okay. So again, since it's a picture app, we're going to want photos, and each photo is going to have a URL to the actual photo, and it's going to have a caption. So we do this by typing in Rails generate. So a scaffold is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's a scaffold for your web app. So it's going to generate a bunch of pages that will interact with posts. So we'll call these photos, and photos will have two fields. One will be the URL, which is going to be a text, and the second is going to be a caption, which is also going to be text. What do I do? Oh, yeah. So now everything has been installed, so we just set up the database. So we just set up the database, and we run Rails server. So Rails server is kind of like npm start, it just starts the server. So now our server is up, and we can go to localhost 3000, and we go to /photos now. We can add new photos. And we create. Then we see that the image has been successfully uploaded. So now if we want to do something like we did yesterday and have the image just display itself, it's very easy. We just open up the associated view. I'll talk about this a bit more later. So photos. And it's an image, so we want to just display the image. And in Rails, because it's magical, we can just type image tag here, and it will actually automatically show itself. So we start the server again. Wow. I can't spell. So now, if we do this again, it will actually show us our So this is great because in around like 12 minutes, we just made an app that kind of functions and displays kind of what we want to do. So let's talk a bit more about Rails. We're going to upload these slides later, so if you want to... This is not working. So if you want to follow along, these are the commands that we just ran. Rails new pix, which again creates the Rails application. cd pix, which enters it, and then you scaffold. You create and migrate your database, and you start the server, and you're up and running. So if you want to do this at home, look at the slides. It's located in that. So now that we've shown just how magical Ruby on Rails can be, let's take a closer look and actually answer the question of what is Ruby on Rails. Well, Ruby is a programming language. It's a lot like Python, or you can consider something like Java. It's basically just another programming language that lets you specify what you want to do. Rails is a server-side web framework, so Rails is what provides all the magic. And it's basically an alternative to Node.js in that it sits on the server and it answers web requests with pages that you want to serve. So I just introduced a new programming language to you. It's called Ruby. And you might be going, I don't actually know Ruby right now. But it's okay, because to use Rails, you don't actually have to know Ruby. Most of us on the staff use Rails, and we don't actually really know how Ruby works either. But the syntax is very intuitive, and it's not like Python. So I would say, don't let not knowing Ruby be an obstacle to you choosing to use Rails. So how does Rails work? Again, it uses the model view controller pattern. You're going to be seeing this pattern a lot throughout web development. And to get a better understanding of the model view controller pattern, let's follow the life of a request again. I know that we've done this several times in lecture before, but this is a very, very important process in web development. So we're going to do it again right now. So say you send a request to the server. The server is going to see your request, and your request is going to be for a specific URL, the URL that you typed into your web browser. So this URL is going to get fed into a router, and the router is going to match your URL route to an actual controller. What does the controller do? Well, the controller looks at the request and it knows the associated models and views. So models are basically persistent data in the database, and the view is basically the HTML that you want to give it. So the controller is then going to basically combine the data in the models, so the data in your databases, and the view, which is your HTML, and it's going to load you, and it's going to return you a dynamic response. So I'll go through a quick walkthrough to show you how this guys works. So we'll do this by making a home page for our app. So my application's homepage currently looks like this. This is kind of not very nice, but since it's a photo app, we're now going to make this load a bunch of photos. So the first step in doing this is to add the route. So in Rails, the routes are located in config set_routes.rb. And luckily, when Rails creates itself, it also generates all this documentation. So you can see here, there's like 2 lines of code and like 50 lines of documentation that tell you everything you could possibly ever want to do with Rails. So here, if we look at line 8, it says, you can have the root of your site routed with root. So that's exactly what we want to do. So we'll do that. And we'll route it to the index method in the home controller, which we will make in a moment. So if we go to the controllers, and we make a home controller. Actually, I'm just going to copy the photos controller because I'm lazy. So let's just delete all this stuff. And then we make a new method. Okay, we called it index in the route, so we're going to call it index here. And then this should not be photos controller, it should be home controller. So it's okay. So we've just made the route and the controller that handles the route. So now we need to make the models, so now we need to basically make the view that encodes. So if if we go to app/views, we're going to make the folder called home because it's the home controller, so it's going to look in the home folder for the views. Wow, I can't spell. And then we're going to make this ERB file. So an ERB file is basically, ERB is basically a templating language. So later we're going to look at how these templates actually work. But when we do this, then we just type something like hello world. And we go back here, we go to our server. And we go here, and now it says hello world. So basically, what we did is we made a route, which is this line. So we routed the root, which is basically slash with nothing else in the URL. We routed this to the index method in the home's controller, which looks like this. Oops, which looks like this. And this index method, because Rails is magical, it automatically maps itself to the index view, which is this. So Rails displays hello world. Are there any questions about this? No? So since this is going to be a Photos app, we're going to want something that says something more interesting than just hello world on our home page. So say you have a Photos app. What do you want on your home page? Any suggestions? No? Okay, we're going to put something like photos on our home page. So to do that, in the controllers, we want to load photos from our database. So we do this in Rails by setting a variable equals. So we can just grab all the photos. This photos word here, this capital photos is a collection. So it basically refers to the database table called photos. And not all just grabs everything from the photos table. So now we loaded all the photos into this variable, and we can access this variable directly from the view. So we do something like this. So we go back into the view. We can type there so since we just set this variable photos in the controller, we can access it directly from the view. And this less than % equal thing is basically tells ERB that it's actually a variable. It's not the literal string photos.size. So now if we look at, now we start our server again. I should just always leave the server started now. So now we start the server again. So now we start the server again, we can see that there are 2 photos currently loaded in the database. And just to check to make sure that this works, we'll go to photos/new and add a new photo. This isn't actually a photo, but that's okay. So now we can see that there's 2 photos. So we basically just added persistent. Well, we basically just added. So Rails has basically added persistent storage for us. So we told it to create a photos table, and now we can actually dynamically load it and grab stuff from the database back out into this onto our home page. So this again is not terribly interesting, but Rails. So Rails lets us do more stuff that's a bit more interesting as well. So because I don't really want to CSS or anything. I'm just going to use fabrics because I'm a bad person. So we're going to actually iterate. So the templating language is also going to let us iterate over all the photos. So if we want to display, say, for example, each photo, we can do it like this. So photos, each do photo. So basically, for each photo, okay, this. We want to make a list item that has the actual photo in it. So we make a list, that's the URL of, and for each photo we have a list item. And since we're going to actually display the photos themselves, we'll use this image tag photo URL to display them. So now again, when we look at our home page, it looks like this. Does that make sense? Any questions? So I've actually talked a bit about databases, but we haven't actually formally introduced databases to you yet. So who here has worked with databases, or actually just knows what a database is? Okay, that's like right now. So a database is basically persistent storage. So you saw yesterday, if you remember what Charles said, he said that every time you restart the app, everything in the fake database is destroyed. This is understandably suboptimal because if like your power goes out, then you lose all the data on your website, which you probably don't want. So a database is basically persistent storage, and a database basically looks like this. So you have to, how do I remember this thing? Yeah. So you basically have a bunch of tables in a database. So a database is basically a collection of tables. So let's say you're using Facebook or something. So part of the Facebook database probably looks like this. So you have users. So you have a user table. You have photos. And you might have something else, like, say, likes. So the database is basically a collection of tables, and in each table, you have a bunch of rows and columns. So the columns are going to look something like this. You might have an ID attached to each user. You might have like a name attached to each user. And you might have like an email attached to each user. And so the IDs are going to be sequential or something. So it might be like 1, 2, or 3. And your names might be like, let's just assume someone made a bunch of fake Facebook accounts. So your names might be A, B, and C. And your emails are going to be a@mit.edu, B and C. So a database basically consists of a bunch of these tables, and we'll look at the actual schema of the database right now here. So a schema is basically a list of everything in the database. So here we can see that if you read all this text, it basically just says, don't change this file because it's all automatically generated. But you can see that it says create tables photo. So it makes a table in the database called photos. And then the tables, and then the columns in the database are, you have a text column called URL, a text column called caption, and 2 date times that keep track of metadata for this row. So again, this is automatically generated. This has this long blip at the top telling you not to edit it. But occasionally you might have to actually change stuff. So now let's say we want to add like an author field to, so instead of just having the picture and the caption in each photo, we're also going to want a small field saying, who uploaded it. So we do that by, again, so we'll do that by making a new migration. A migration is basically an update to the table. So add user to So here you can see the original migration. If you don't remember us making it, that's because this migration is automatically generated when we scaffold. And here we have the new migration that we're going to make. So we basically just echo what's at the top again. So instead of creating the table, we're going to want to update this table. And then we'll just add another text field because we don't have any actual users on this. I'll just call it user. So we'll go on to add this column. So now if we look at the schema again, you'll see that we have this extra user column, which we can now read and write from. Okay. So that's the basics of how Rails works. In review, so in review, to basically make a new page on a Rails app, we start with a route. So what the route does is it basically takes the URL that you're given. So for here, so if you want to go to localhost 3000/photos, so if you look at this URL, once again, how this URL is actually translated into this page is, if you look at routes.rb, you'll see a rule matching this route. So if you look at config/routes.rb, you'll see a bunch of rules, and these will match specific URLs to specific controller actions. And if you want to see how to run routes, you could run rake routes. So again, routes match the URL of the controller action. So in the controllers, you have a bunch of application logic. So the controllers are where you actually do the querying through your database. You might do stuff like check who's logged in. You might do stuff like, if this person is logged in, give them this page, otherwise give them this other page. So the controller has all your application logic in it, and it knows the relevant models and views for the database. If you ever need help with controllers, that first link there is a guide to querying. So it basically tells you how to do stuff like find the first user in the database or find the user in the database with a given email. So if you have any questions about querying, you can look at that URL. A model is basically a wrapper for the database. So it's where all your persistent database lives. You guys might have heard about stuff like MySQL and PostgreSQL and SQLite 3 and like 80,000 other variants of SQL. You don't actually have to worry about these in Rails because Rails abstracts these away from you. So, So Rails basically abstracts these away from you, so you don't actually have to worry about what specific SQL commands you have to use. But instead, you can just access the model, and then the model will do the rest of the work for you. Again, migrations are linked, models are linked to migrations. You probably don't want to rename or merge these migrations because the names actually matter. They live in db/migrations, and they control the schema of the database. And the views are where the actual HTML lives. They're used to render a response, and they use templates. So to get started, you want to install Rails. This is actually kind of difficult, but there's a nice guide online at installrails.com. And if you don't want to install Rails, there's a virtual machine that we have set up for you. It has Rails installed. I think it's Node installed. It might have some other stuff installed for you guys to use. And again, for resources, Rails comes with a lot of things called gems. So a gem is basically a plugin for a feature that will install itself. So if you're like, 647 requires us to have user logins, but you don't actually want to build a user login yourself, because to do that, then you have to encrypt your passwords and you have to hash your passwords, and that's actually kind of a mess, and you don't really want to do stuff like, well, what if you forgot your password? So device is a gem that basically sets it all up for you. Another gem that you might find useful is Foundation Rails, and it's a front-end framework. If you have any questions, you can ask us on Piazza or come to office hours. Are there any questions about why it's not over for Rails? No? Okay. Okay, it's 35. Okay, well, that's... Okay, are there any features you guys want to see in Rails? Because developing in Rails is actually really quick, and we can just build it right now. If not, we'll give you guys some free time to install Rails or ask us about Node if you have any other questions.
I'm so out of shape right now, though. So generally,
so they're getting this drop off. Why?